Mixed emotions Tuesday as Governor J.B. Pritzker delivers his 7th State of the State address, I should say Wednesday. J.B. Pritzker points to what he believes are key cost-saving measures like finding efficiencies in daily operations and eliminating unnecessary hiring. He also says that his 2025 budget will get rid of boards and commissions that are not doing anything and overhaul state purchases to save Illinois taxpayers money.
Each and every year, I have proposed a balanced budget, and each and every year, the General Assembly has passed a balanced budget. As I stand ready to work with members of the General Assembly to deliberate and negotiate the final budget. But let's be clear, I will only sign a balanced budget.